Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Audit Committee. We start with the agenda. Number one item on your agenda, as the usual, apologies for absence, Andrea.
We have apologies from Councillor Towns and Sesford.
Thank you, Andrea. We are still quorate, so that's fine. Item 2 of the agenda is the minutes from the last meeting. Now, the minutes were circulated over a week ago from the last meeting. The meeting was held on the 25th of January. These are to be confirmed as a true record. As usual, I'm not going to propose to do a page turner on these, but just to open it up if anybody has any particular questions or issues on the minutes. No? Okay. Can we have a proposer that the minutes are a true record? Councillors Oliver and Jackson seconded. Thank you very much. So that's okay. We'll move on from there. Number 3 on the agenda, the usual item, disclosure of members' interests, unless already entered in the Council's Register of Members' Interests. Members are required, where a matter arises at a meeting which directly relates to a disclosable pecuniary interest, as set out in Appendix B, Table 1 of the Code of Conduct, etc. The details are in the agenda there. Yes, Councillor Grimshaw.
Yes, Chair, just page 47, item number 6.
So that's the joint report of the Cabinet members for children and young people and adults' wellbeing. So you've got an interest in that one?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think we discussed in our pre-meeting that it wasn't a major interest, and it is regarding a defunct part of the organisation anyway. So I think the members are quite happy for you to remain within the meeting but not take part in the actual discussion. So if you're happy to do that, because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to leave the room and come back a minute later. So I'm happy with that.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Can I have a receipt of the council pension? I think a lot of people are saying.
Does that represent a pecuniary interest? I wonder. It probably does in some respects. Councillor Dale is in receipt of a council pension.
Yes, I think a lot of members are. I'm just saying, because I want to clarify it.
So this is more. Yeah.
I've never been to a local borough audit committee anywhere in the country where that's been disclosed as an interest.
Thank you. That's fine. That's all I wanted to say.
It's good for transparency, but I don't think it has any material real impact, does it? So I think we're okay with that. But thank you for bringing that forward, Councillor. So okay. So I think if we're okay with that one, and as usual, Councillor Reid, you're a director from Advance. So if there's anything relating to Advance on the.
Yeah, Chair, the reason I haven't said anything is because I've declared it already. But when it comes up, I'll leave.
That's fine. But for the clarity of the recording, so we've got those pecuniary interests there. Okay, so that's the disclosures done. Number 4 on your list is the monitoring report and action log. So this is our standing item where we are keeping track of things which are in train, reports which have been promised, reports which have been delivered. So if we start on reference 1, the CALA report, regular updates on progress made to address issues rising from the CALA report, including the monitoring the action plan for an item to be placed on the work programme, and update received at the January 23 meeting on the Challenge Board progress. Obviously, that was the last time we had an update on this. There isn't anything particular in this meeting on the CALA report, but we have got it as an open item. So it is something which we will continue to receive reports on as time goes on. So we leave that one as open. Item number 2, the Strategic Transformation Programme business case. To receive a report on the business case to ensure best value for money for the item to be placed on the work programme. Corporate Services and Economic Growth, OSC, would scrutinise the business case and suggested a discussion with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Work Committee to ensure that there was no duplication of workload. Now, that still hasn't happened, so therefore that is still open. Number 3, adult social care and wider NHS changes to monitor any impacts and for the item to be placed on the work programme, which it has, but again remains open. Number 4, update on the independent review of international. Further update report will be presented to the November meeting. The report was rescheduled for the March 23 meeting, i.e. this meeting, but the report has been deferred again. Now, I think John, as a Section 151 officer, you might have a little bit to expand on that one.
Yes, Chair. So the
person leading that investigation, John Gilbert, is currently going through the Maxwellisation process, which requires him to share excerpts of the report which refer to individuals prior to publication, to give them the opportunity to further comment and respond. It's clearly difficult to know exactly how long that process is going to take, because it depends on how quickly people respond to him. I think it's unlikely that the report will be finalised before the end of April. It may drag on even beyond the end of April. And I know that that's frustrating to committee members, that you've been waiting some time to see this report, but it is a legal process which we're required to go through. So he is, doing everything that he can to expedite that, and he will get the report here as soon as he can. I think it's likely that we will be looking at a date sometime in May for that report to come to the committee.
So what's been the hold-up? Is it just the simple volume of work that's involved in this and the number of people it has to speak to?
So the Maxwellisation process requires extracts from the report to be prepared for each individual that is named in the report, and for those extracts to be sent to those individuals, for them to be given a reasonable amount of time to respond. And then everybody has to have that opportunity, and that has to happen before the final report can be issued. So, and I think we have to be mindful of the fact that Easter is intervening as well. So I think he's at the point where he's about to start sending out those extracts. And it's not unusual, where people are unwell or they're on holiday or whatever, where then, they request an extension of time to respond. And that's why it's difficult to say exactly how long the process is going to take, as well as the extent of any objections that there may be from people to, to his draft conclusions. Yeah. So, it takes as long as it takes.
It isn't an easy process. I'm well aware that this is very, very difficult, and it's quite a complex thing, and it's fraught with legal requirements attached. It just seems, it's quite frustrating, as you said, because Christmas intervened and now Easter's going to intervene and so on. We hope that this isn't going to drag on very much longer than this. Do you feel fairly confident that actually we might get something for the May Audit Committee?
Well, I think that's a reasonable expectation given where we currently are. I think we'll have a better idea of that around the middle of April. So what I would suggest is that I have a conversation with you, Chair, at that point, and we can get an update out to committee members with hopefully a tentative date for a meeting to consider the report.
That would be very useful if you could do that, Jan. Thank you. I think we do appreciate the amount of work that goes into this. It isn't an easy thing by any stretch of the imagination. Okay. Item number 5, review of exit packages. Audit Committee be kept informed where appropriate. Again, that is another open one because we haven't got anything particularly on today's. Councillor Jackson, you did have a question on that.
Yeah, just on that one. I think the way it's written in this action list is not the way that some of us on the committee, or all of us on the committee, understood that this work was going to go forward. We had a report last week, at the last meeting, which was actually quite concerning and included quite a lot of detail in it. But then there was general discussion in the committee, and we thought that the issues actually went wider than that, and that we were going to get a further report into more of the detail, particularly including the sort of employment practices around senior directors, not just the exit payments. It's a point that was made quite strongly in the Calla report, and I think it would be a reasonable follow-up from the Calla report for this committee to do some work on that. The Section 151 officer did indicate that there was potentially a Section 114 notice coming in relation to these matters. And it is concerning because it is a key responsibility of this committee to ensure that the council is operating legally and that all good governance is being observed, and that if it isn't, it's our duty to report that to the full council.
Absolutely.
So I think just to sort of brush over it with this as an action point, from my point of view, is not detailed enough and doesn't give me the confidence that this work is going to be done.
Well, I think we left it at the last meeting, if you remember, in January, where I think there's two strands. I think one, the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer were going to look further into the individual cases to see whether a 114 notice was required. And also we had an extra piece of work for internal audit to do, which was to look broader across the piece to see whether, because in the first piece of work that was done, it was only high payments that were looked at. And there was found to be what looked like possibly systemic problems with those high payments. We wanted to know whether there was going to be a problem all the way down the line. So every payment that had been made all the way down the line from the lowest to the highest had a systemic problem with it. That in itself, I think, was an important piece of information. We thought at the last meeting, and I think we still think, in the sense that it'll show whether this is a problem across the board or whether it's just affected the very highest payments that were made. Now, there's two questions there, I think, we've got for colleagues who are here today. And what is, where are we with those two pieces of work? And I think that is exactly where we're coming from, isn't it, Councillor Jackson? And what you're saying is that where are we with these two pieces of work?
Yeah, but it's also, it's actually wider than that. And it sort of came into focus when I came across an ex-officer of the council just a couple of weeks ago who I didn't know about, but he was convinced that he'd been forced out of the organisation without any due process and possibly
we can't
illegally.
really comment on individual cases like that. And
Well,
I think it's not really helpful
yeah,
to this
another
committee.
example that's been brought, and I didn't mention a particular person.
Okay. Can we just pick up on the two pieces of work that we asked for last time?
There has been a systemic issue in employment and dismissal practices, and not just the payment, not just the exit packages.
That's what we're all looking to investigate at the present time, and that's what internal audit and the Section 151 officer obviously are looking into it. But I think the question I have for both of them, so I'll start with Kevin, is we asked for a piece of work on a broader basis, Kevin, to look at all these payments and see whether the problem went all the way down from top to bottom. How are we doing with that at the present time?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I can certainly answer that part of the question. And I think, as I've explained to committee previously, that piece of work was already included on our internal audit plan of work for the year. So rather than it being anything that was requested by the committee, it was already on our scheduled plan of work, which we agreed last March. That work, as you can imagine, is quite a substantial piece of work. It's quite a review that we're undertaking. That work is well underway. I know at the previous meeting I was sort of asked and challenged about when that work would be complete and the findings would come through to committee. But when that work is finalised with the clients and agreed and issued as normal, that will follow on in due course to committee as it would in the normal fashion with any other audit report, and we can certainly give a bit more information than normal. We normally provide committee with the summary reports twice a year where we talk about every report that we issue. We can always expand that into a bit more detail if that would be what the committee would wish once that report is finalised. But it is in progress. I would sort of reassure the committee that the work is in progress.
So that work's in progress, but from my mind, your work sort of informs the work that the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer will be doing, in the sense that if we're looking at the systemic problem, which is across the board here, or we're just looking at the individual cases that were wrong. Was that your understanding of it, Jan, in terms of how this might mesh together, or have you already taken decisions already on those individual cases?
So, in conjunction with the monitoring officer, still considering the individual cases that I'm aware of, and I do think that we need to differentiate between the work that internal audit are doing, which is around providing assurance around the adequacies of controls, as they are today, not as they were in the past, and the work which I and the monitoring officer are doing, which is specifically around individual transactions and the lawfulness of those individual transactions. If further transactions come to light through the work that internal audit are doing, that also require us to consider the lawfulness, then we will add them. We will add them to the list. But as I think I said previously, at some point, I think we need to draw a line under, you know, what has happened in the past and focus more on, you know, the strength of the controls and the arrangements that we have in place to safeguard the organisation here and now. Because we only have a limited amount of resource that we can deploy at any one time. And if we deploy all of that resource investigating things that have gone wrong in the past, I don't think that's terribly helpful. So it's about getting the right balance.
I think the key thing is to learn from the past and get it right in the
Indeed.
future.
Indeed.
I think that's where we're all coming from, I think. I don't think there's anything more than that attached to it. Councillor Oliver, you had your hand up.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree with Jan that we do need to draw a line, but I would say the best way to draw a line is to reach a conclusion, and to reach a conclusion about whether any further action is required, to reach a conclusion about what has actually happened, so that can inform the controls going forward. I think that's key. Thank you both for your updates, but neither of them mentioned timescales. I know it's quite difficult but could we have an indication of timescales? And also, in Cameron's audit report for the 2021, both two issues are highlighted as significant issues. And can I just ask Cameron whether he's had all of the information that he needs from the council to be able to sort of reach a proper conclusion on those issues?
John, correct me if I've got some of this incorrect, but I don't think I have. So first and foremost, we're looking to make sure that the numbers in the accounts are those that should be in the accounts. So in two respects. One is, are they complete? So is there anything missing from the disclosure that should be in there that hasn't been? And I think there have been some amendments working through this with Alison and Jan. Secondly is making sure that the numbers are right. So the amount that's actually been paid out are right. And I think broadly, I think we're comfortable now on 2021 and 21-22 and the prior year figures, I think, for 19-20 that sit in the 2021 accounts. Now, you remember, I think a little while ago, where we discussed the REM report in relation to the international allowance. So Jan obviously issued her Section 114A report last June. And that for us obviously there was an issue. So if you think through the auditing standards we have to comply with, ISO 250, which covers laws and regulations, that represented non-compliance with laws and regulations, because it must do, mustn't it? So we looked at the underlying regulations that govern what have to be put in the council's accounts, the code of practice that you've got to follow, but there's also accounts and audit regulations. What the accounts and audit regulations say, and they cover more specifically what's in that particular note, is that it should be the amount that's, I think it says paid or payable, doesn't it, Jan, to the person. So the fact is the council paid that allowance to that person. Yep. So therefore we concluded, we took internal advice that as long as the council amended disclosure accounts, then that wouldn't be an issue for us in terms of qualification. And we agreed to form words now, I think, on that, Jan, as well. I need to go into both sets. So I'm using it as an analogy to this issue. So subject to a decision around about the lawfulness or otherwise or exit packages, then clearly we have to go through that same process to decide whether or not the disclosure has to be amended to reflect some of that. And even if that disclosure is amended, whether or not we need to do anything else in terms of the wording of the audit report. So for example, an option for an auditor is where it's not a qualification issue, but you think it's important. And we've discussed previously the fact that materiality is the number we test your accounts, but not for that bit of the accounts because we think that's a high public interest. Nothing to do with international or anything else. Every council is high public interest. That's what people look at. Then if a matter is of such importance, then we could consider including a paragraph in the audit report that's not a qualification, but just sets out, we draw a reader's attention to note whatever it is in the accounts that states. We don't repeat what's already in the accounts, we just draw somebody's attention. Now we're still discussing that. My gut feeling is based on the disclosure in the accounts, the fact is, generally speaking, the first page anybody that reads the accounts goes to tends to be officer remuneration and members' allowances, bluntly, and maybe a few other things these days. then there's a bit of a judgment still to be made about whether or not that's necessary in our part. So we'll go through that process again in exit packages once the work that Jan's already outlined is complete. I hope that's clear.
Okay, that's great. That is clear. Fine. Jan, did you want to follow on anything on that?
Yeah, in terms of timescale, again, I'm not being difficult, Councillor Oliver, but it's really, really difficult to say because, you know, I have to get Casey's opinion, and I have to, and it's a separate opinion on each individual transaction, and I don't know what the Casey is going to say at the moment. We're just trying to make sure that we've got all of the information that the KC needs in order to give an opinion. But there are two separate issues here. One is, you know, are any of the individual transactions unlawful? And secondly, if any of those transactions are unlawful, is my duty to issue a Section 114 or 114A report triggered? Because that's a matter of judgment for me. It's not an automatic thing, and there's a range of things that I need to consider. So I also need Casey's advice on that, as will the monitoring officer in relation to her Section 5 reporting duty. So there's quite a lot still for us to work through, but we're doing it as quickly as we can. And certainly, I think, you know, the intention is that we will conclude that work before the new monitoring officer takes over. In early June. I think that's the best I can offer you at the moment.
No,
That's very clear, Janet. Obviously, if anything comes up in between audit committees, I mean, I trust that you will,
of course,
contact us and bring it to our attention. So in case we needed to convene an interim meeting just to discuss this particular issue, because it is important enough to actually do that, I think. But I appreciate the difficulty that you've got at the present time. It's a minefield to actually work through. So thanks for that update. Okay, well, that's the first couple of parts of the action pad. The second part of the action pad is the work programme. Now, this is the stuff that actually we've been promised as part of the work programme for this committee, just to make sure we're ticking it off and making sure it's coming forward. Well, for this committee, we were promised from Internal Audit and Risk Management the Strategic Audit Plan for 23-24, and that is on our agenda at item 16, so that's done. The Annual Audit Committee Work Programme, which is also on the agenda at item 5. Corporate Risk Management, which I understand we're going to get a verbal update from Kevin later on. For Corporate Finance, we had the Group Boundary Review 22-23, which appears as item 8 on this agenda. The Statement of Accounts 20-21, which was deferred from the September 22 meeting, which will be deferred until May this time. For External Audit, the Audit Completion Report 2021, which had been deferred from September's meeting, which is now an item 10 on your agenda, and which you have hard copies available if you need them. We have the Counter Fraud team who are going to provide us with a Counter Fraud update on item 7. The Group Audit Committee Update Report, which will be item 14 on the agenda, which will be a verbal update from Kevin. And Education and Safeguarding Performance, the review of external inspection reports appears as item 6, and colleagues will be presenting that report later on. So very much completed there, except for the Statement of Accounts 20-21. But obviously reasons for that. So that's not too bad. That's not too bad. We are getting the material through as we expect in the time that we expect it. Okay, so unless anybody's got any particular questions on that action pad, I'm quite optimistic actually that it's helping to actually keep track of these things, that they're not slipping through the cracks as they were, I think, previously, because I think there was a problem with that, but it's not happening so much now. But if we're happy to move on, colleagues, item number 5 on the agenda is the report of the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management, Audit Committee Work Programme 23-24, and that's Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an administrative report which we bring to committee in March every year, and sort of neatly following on from the last item which we've just covered, which just presents for Audit Committee's agreement a proposed outline of a work programme for the coming year for 2023-24. Obviously, that is subject to some change with ad hoc reports, which may be added to that work programme throughout the year as we go. But obviously, it just forms the basis of a proposed draft work programme for committee for next year. I would just draw members' attention to the table which is on page 22 and 23, where we just take each meeting during the year and give an idea of the proposed reports and who those reports would be received from, just to give an idea of the work programme during the year. We are obviously also aware from previous discussions and meetings of the committee that we're in the process of just looking at the SIPFA's new position statement on audit committees and reviewing the arrangements of our audit committee, just to make sure that the committee is fulfilling its terms of reference. So there's a little bit of a caveat to the proposed work programme in that once that work and that review is complete, it may be necessary to come back to the committee to say we would propose to amend it during the year, but obviously we'd come back and report that to you as a committee, as you would expect. But at this moment in time, this is the work programme that we would propose. But happy to take any comments or questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I'll open this up if anybody has. It seems fairly clear and it seems fairly standard. And I take your point about the SIPFA guidance might actually slightly tweak things and make an impact, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Councillor Dale, you had a question.
Can I just mention, carrying on from the external auditor's statement of accounts, in there you've actually got about reviewing the 2021 annual government statement. So will that be incorporated into May, or how immediate do you want that work doing? It's the one that's
Yes, I think it's already been here, Councillor Dale, for that year.
No, this is, maybe I've got the wrong year. Sorry.
Sorry, we do need to check it, but just before we sign off, just to make sure there's no post-market events we need to consider, but the work on it's gone.
Oh, right, thank you very much.
Just if anything else.
Right, so obviously later than this one. Thank you.
Okay, right, okay, thank you. No problems. Yeah, Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. One question and a suggestion. The question is just, are we expecting, Kevin mentioned the terms of reference, are we expecting any changes to the terms of reference as a review of as a result of the work that's happening with the Constitution at the moment? There's some very, very comprehensive work reviewing the Constitution. And then the other point was kind of relating back to the last item, which was around the strategic transformation programme and where it sort of overlaps with scrutiny committees. I just wonder whether it might be a good idea for you, Chair, to be invited to the next scrutiny chairs meeting. And then that can all be, because there's a bit of I know audit is not technically a scrutiny committee, but there is a bit of overlap, and then at least it can be clear what goes where.
I'm more than happy to attend any committee that is appropriate for me as the chair. For information purposes, it's good to oversee. It's always good to know where the lines are between different committees, so you know that nothing has, as I said before, fall between the gaps. So I'll be more than happy to attend if anybody objected to that. Obviously, I would take that on board, but I'll be more than happy to attend.
Yeah. So, thank you, Chair. If I can just add to that, to answer Councillor Oliver's questions. Yes, there is as part of the review of the Constitution, because the SIPFA position statement has been updated slightly, there will be a need to reflect those changes in terms of reference for Audit Committee, which we're doing in conjunction with the update of the Constitution. So yes, to answer that part of your question. I think that the second part of your question, as we've sort of said about looking at reviewing the arrangements with all of you as committee members as well as other stakeholders with the chair, it's then thinking about how the terms of reference of the committee are being met or how they may wish to be met. And that's where sort of saying that the work programme may change dependent upon the discussions with yourselves as committee members. I think your point is a very good point around the liaison with scrutiny committee. And it's we have to be it's a very clear distinction between the audit committee's function and the function of scrutiny to keep them very distinctly different. But I agree in terms of, as part of the review that we're in the process of undertaking, how audit committee is assured from various different sources, scrutiny committees being one of them. And if committee would like to see some form of assurance, whatever that may look like, if it's the chair attending scrutiny meetings or discussions with scrutiny chairs, that's something we can sort of look at as part of those arrangements.
Okay, that sounds like a good way forward. We'll watch this one. We'll see what turns out to be the best way to do this, Kevin, so we'll keep the connections going. That's good, thank you. So unless there's any more on agenda item 5, I think we are asked to agree the proposed core business work programme and the items on recommendations on 1, 2, 3, 4 on the front page there. So can we have a proposer for that? Can we agree these? Propose, yeah, Councillor Dale and seconded by Councillor Jackson. So thank you. I think we'll take that as read. Okay, we move on to item number 6. This is the joint report of the Cabinet members for children and young people and adults' wellbeing, a review of external inspection reports, adult social care and children's services. And we have Alan Hartwell and Alan Curry, colleagues, come to present this. So over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Alan Hartwell. I'm Senior Manager for Performance and System Support in Human Services, and this is Alan Curry, who's the Senior Manager for Commissioning within Adult Services. This is the regular report that this committee receives about external inspections that have taken place over a 6-month period within adult services and within children's services. The period that this report covers is from the start of July up to the end of December 2022, and the next report that this committee will receive will be in September 23. So the content within the report is fairly up to date, but where there have been some updates since this report was submitted, I will share those with members. The report presents what inspection activity has taken place over that 6-month period, what the latest position is with regards to the judgments that have come out of those inspections, and also what actions are being taken where required in response to any issues that have been raised within those inspections. And I would draw members' attention to section 5.1, where within adult services actions have been taken and are being taken to issues that have arisen from inspections. I would, whereas the judgments do speak for themselves within the report, I would draw members' attention to the grades that were received following the inspection of the Kylo House secure unit that happened within the period. For the first time, that unit received a judgment of outstanding across the board on all judgments, which is a very, very impressive outcome. Certainly for the children and people who were within that unit, and obviously for the staff as well. There has been inspection activity of schools. Obviously that continues, and so there has been inspection activity of schools, and reports have been published since this report was submitted. And it is also worth mentioning that just as in section 5.2.2, where the report refers to the pending inspection around youth justice services, we have actually now received notification of that. So Northumberland, as a local authority, is going to receive an inspection of its youth justice services in the week beginning the 17th to the 21st of April. And the outcome of that would be reported to this committee within the September report. The report does also mention that Northumberland, as a local authority, we are inspecting an inspection of our children's social care services, similar to the inspection that took place in January 2020. We are expecting that inspection will take place in this calendar year. Obviously, we haven't received notification yet, but when we do, we basically get a week's notice, and then that inspection will last for a week after that in terms of the field work. And obviously, the results and the outcome from that and any actions arising would come back to this committee. I think, Chair, that probably summarises the key points within the report, an overall positive picture. I'm certainly happy to take any questions in regards to children's services, and I know Alan is with regards to adult services.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Alan. And yes, I agree with you. It is an overall very positive picture, and I think the last time you came to the committee and presented a similar report, that was probably a bit more positive than the one before that as well. So I think there's a general trajectory of improvement generally around this whole area. But I'll open it up to the committee to see if anybody has. Councillor Dale, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's great to hear about Browndale and the other schools, because I think that's really good, Kylo, outstanding, because I know how important these services are to the local children, and you know they are important. And I used to go around looking at them. I stopped all that a long time ago. Do you remember? The only thing that I would draw to attention is it's just my concerns about some of the the inspections for the homes, and the fact that they've actually gone from outstanding in some cases, and this is July 22, and then in December 22, they seem to have gone to red. And I don't know whether, the thing was, to be quite honest, we couldn't read the report very clearly. It just came out of blur, and I think another councillor mentioned that as well. It's just to say, you know, it's sad. Are you actually working, is the council working with these homes to ensure that they improve?
Councillor Dale, I think that's a reference to the adult older persons care homes.
Yes.
So they're on page 29 of the papers. There's a table in there which is colour-coded as well. Yeah. You're referring to those homes that have seen a deterioration in their rating, and sadly there are some homes where they haven't been able to hold on to. There was one outstanding home that's moved down to good, I think, and there were several good homes that have moved down to requires improvement.
Yeah.
Conversely, we've had some other homes that have moved in the opposite direction,
yeah.
Which almost balances it out. Not quite, but it almost does. I mean, first and foremost, they are independent organisations. Yeah. They are separate businesses. We do our best to support them in the lead up to any inspection regime. You know, if we spot issues in a home, irrespective of where it's at in its inspection cycle, we would deploy council officers to try and support the home and rectify any problems that we spot. So we might notice things like a change in a manager. You know, somebody might have been there for a long time, kept a home stable, they move on. We know things like that are a risky period of time for that kind of home, or there might be, you know, particularly complex individuals referred into a home, all of which can affect the quality of how it operates. So we do try and keep on top of that. Sadly, in those cases where we've seen a deterioration, we haven't been able to do that. Certainly those homes and services where we've seen an improvement in the rating, we would have been involved in those as well. You know, when something's rated as requires improvement or inadequate, we would deploy officers into that to support the management of the home, staff and the owners as well, to try and improve and rectify any problems that exist.
Thank you. You know, whether people go up and down, it's just looking at individual homes in a way. Can I just ask you, the thing is I can't read all the reports, so that's why thank you for saying it's got one outstanding, one down to good. But do we still place clients in those homes?
So we take a judgment depending on each individual rating. So you'll see in the report that there are 2 that are rated inadequate, and there were the last time we came to this committee as well. When the rating first came out, we weren't placing individuals. What we try and do is get the provider to actually agree that they won't accept referrals. That's the easiest. If they, you know, we can convince them that it's not the right time for them to be receiving new referrals in, perhaps stretching their staff. You know, we want to make sure that they've got as much time as they possibly can to improve the situation. There's been a sort of 6-month period between the inadequate ratings and now, and those ratings haven't changed, but we know, because we've got eyes on the services, if you like, that we think there have been improvements. So certainly for one of them that's rated inadequate, we weren't placing at the time of the decision, but because in that intervening period we've recognised some improvements, we've worked with the provider and agreed with them that they can start to take placements. So one of those, for example, is taking 1 new referral every 2 weeks. We have to scrutinise the needs of the individual who's moving in there, making sure that they aren't going to stretch the service and challenge it too much. So we do get into the detail in those kind of scenarios and try and make sure it's as safe as referral as possible. And just we have to balance that against the viability of the home as well, because if you imagine an older person's care home, there is a turnover there as people leave the homes. Sadly, people die in those homes. They have to receive new referrals, otherwise there's a risk to its financial viability. So we have to balance that, and certainly for the one I've been referring to there was a risk about its viability if we didn't make new referrals into it.
Can I just say, I understand, I mean, obviously it's a massive risk at the moment because of the social services and beds and the NHS, etc., etc. So you've got a very difficult job. So thank you for keeping an eye and trying to improve those that need help, because it's important that we do have as many social service care homes in use or good, so we can put placement there.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you for that explanation. That was very useful to unpack that down. Thank you, Councillor Dale. Councillor Grimshaw, you've had your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, it looks fantastic to see the schools, etc., doing exceptionally well. It's marvellous to see. And I'm also delighted to see on page 33, 5.2.5, the saying special educational needs, and I'm delighted that that's a new area of widespread inspections. So I'm really, really delighted to see that, and I hope we're updated regularly with regard to that, because that's very special and dear to my heart. The other things, coming back to care homes, and I know during Storm Arwen, it was brought up with regard to some of the care homes didn't have generators, or, I just wanted to know if we can have an update, if these places now have generators in, because obviously they were lacking in training on contingency plans, and I found that very daunting, because some of these are very vulnerable people that we have in care homes, and also, staff retention, qualifications, that worries me as well, the high turnover of staff, and I know there's no way around it, because obviously it's a very low paid job, but they're highly qualified, caring people. And I just wonder, I know there's nothing we can do about that, but I'm just wondering, is that why? Because we had a high turnover of staff, which it will be. But, hats off to those who are still in the care home industry, because it's very difficult. But also the training providers and the costs for the care home owners to provide the training and the qualifications that really staff should have. And that's an area of concern. But other than that, the care homes are doing a marvellous job, and all the staff, and and I respect everyone that's doing it, because it's a difficult setting to get in for budgets, etc.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Grimshaw. There's a few questions in there, Alan. I think I'll leave you.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry,
I
bombarded you.
There was a few in there. I think the first one was generator. So it was
in Storm Arwen,
yeah.
yes, and it was an issue during Storm Arwen. I think we had 3 specific issues that I can remember, where not too far from here we had an older person's care home that lost power for a considerable period of time. That was supplied with a generator from the network supplier. After the storm, I know elected members wanted to see as many homes as possible purchase their own generators. We've tried to encourage them to do that. It's not something that we can enforce through the contract at this period of time. For all, we are trying our best to encourage them to learn lessons from the storm and go out there and purchase generators. Some have, but we've got 71 older persons' homes and about 27, 28 specialist residential homes as well, and not all of them have generators. I would say the majority don't as yet have generators, and we're looking at ways in which we could facilitate that, whether the council offers some kind of grants, whether actually as adult services we have a small supply of generators that we could dispatch as and when required if there was an emergency situation. The last, we've got some recent history on this subject. So within the last month there is an older person's care home that lost power. It wasn't during a storm. I think something collided with an overhead electricity supply, and the home lost power. Power was restored, but then there was an outage in the home as well. The supply within the home was affected by the outage. That home had a generator, but they struggled to actually get the generator to power all of the home safely. So, there was a real issue around connection and getting the lights on at the same time as the fridges being on, and I think the boilers were out of action as well. So we've got quite a recent example where we've got a lot of lessons learned. Generators certainly part of it. Supply of mobile heaters is certainly another part of it as well. And I think we had a bit more of a positive outcome in terms of the work with the network provider there as well. So generators is part of it. We are going to keep pushing it. And I think we'll have a look at whether we can do, as I say, a small supply of generators ourselves that we could dispatch in an emergency. But look at all of the other issues surrounding it as well. Supply of mobile heaters, I think, is a key one, and supply of heaters that don't require a gas or electricity source of standalone heaters, essentially. In terms of some of the other issues, excuse me if I don't remember these in the right order, so recruitment and retention of staff, I think it mentions in the report here that that is the biggest issue that we're facing in adult social care at this point in time. So we can pinpoint from September 2021, when the economy started to open up again, you know, having been shut down during the pandemic, we started to see significant numbers of people leaving the care sector, and they've been incredibly difficult to replace. So providers are undertaking a lot of initiatives themselves to try and recruit, and quite often we'll see an enormous amount of effort from providers, and you know, after sort of a 12-month period, they're reporting back to me that actually the impact is zero, net zero. You know, they've lost as many as they've been able to retain and recruit. So it continues to be a big problem. As a council, we are taking some measures ourselves. So we've deployed people from the adult services team to move into more recruitment and retention initiatives. So we're underway with some of those, and I think we've got more to go. I also think you mentioned funding in that scenario as well, that, you know, the wages aren't as attractive as working in other sectors, and that will always be a risk to social care providers. I also think the status of care workers is low compared to other types of employment as well, and I think we've got a lot of work to do, and we are planning that within adult services. So Neil, the Executive Director, Neil Bradley, is challenging us as officers to come up with responses on that. So the responses include, we've done job fairs, we had one in here, we've got another one planned for Hexham within the next 6 weeks. We've done pop-ups in shopping centres, in big supermarkets. We've worked closely with DWP just to try and ensure that they recognise the challenges, and that, you know, for people who are seeking work, there are lots of opportunities out there in social care as well. So there is a lot underway, but much more to do. And we're hoping that we'll be able to put some additional funding next year specifically into recruitment and retention issues as well. We've got some government grants coming, and we're just trying to work and understand what the rules around spending those grants are before we start to target them at recruitment and retention.
Okay.
Have I covered all of your questions?
Sorry, Chair. The only other one was the training, the qualifications. And then there again, you know, some care workers have to, you know, pay for them themselves.
Right.
There has some good employers and some who expect the qualifications to be sourced by the care worker, and I find that rather daunting. So it's just, you know, getting a balance of how, you know, some of the care homes are rated, because it could be because lack of qualifications, staff retention, etc., and that being pulled down through no fault of their own. Yeah. You know, but thank you very much for the report. The only other thing, just very quickly, I know this is my very last thing, with regard to the generators. Now, when one of the care homes that could have had a generator very quickly from somewhere else, unfortunately they couldn't accept it because obviously it had to be PAT tested. But yeah. I wonder if there's a possibility in emergencies that crop up, if you identify places that's very close by that has generators, that they could be dual PAT tested, so they could put them straight in an emergency situation. But that's just a comment. But thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that you've got a risk register, Alan, which covers a lot of these sort of points, I would have thought.
And individual homes and
Yeah,
domiciliary
that's what we
services
say.
should all have contingency plans that would cover these.
Yeah, because
kind of
we sounded at
eventualities.
some points there where we were actually debating a risk register as what is the risk, what is the impact, and what are you doing about it, if you like. So that is the sort of thing that we're talking about here, isn't it? Is really is looking at the risks. So you have got that risk register, and these sort of things are on it, I take it, and you have got contingency there.
They are, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
they
that's great. I thought I saw a hand up there. Did I see Peter Topping?
No, Councillor Grimshaw asked a question about recruitment. I was going to ask.
Right. No, thank you. In some ways, the discussion you just had touches on the point I was going to ask, which is the CQC inspections and the inspections generally. How is the information and findings from those reports and those assessments sort of fed into the risk registers, the risk assessment that the council holds? So not just talking about generators, but in a wider context, is, what's the process by which the information and the assessments coming from those inspections feed into our wider risk assessments as a council?
Okay, are you okay to answer that one, Alan?
Yeah, so I think the risks from individual inspections probably aren't in a corporate risk register. They're dealt with on an individual basis, so we would manage those within the service, perhaps with so I work in the part of the council that contracts with those external providers. We might manage the risk through the contract, or we might manage it through our safeguarding teams, or through a combination of us both. Where the risk becomes more of a corporate one, certainly around staffing issues, I think we've got that on the corporate risk register, and that's a risk around us not being able to supply sufficient level of service to the people of Northumberland because we can't supply enough staff. So that one is on as I'm pretty confident that's on as a corporate risk.
So I mean, I think it would be quite normal, wouldn't it, for not a great many risks from your area to be on the corporate risk register. Only those really big ones that are going to be hitting at that really high strategic corporate level. So things like the generators and other things like that wouldn't appear on the corporate risk register, but they would be handled at a lower level, at the local level, if you like. So that's how you're doing it at the present time. Okay. Okay. Well, sorry, I'll come to you in a second. Peter, do you want to just follow up on that one? Are you
Well,
okay with that?
it was just to say that if one of our corporate risks is our ability to respond to our resilience against things like Storm Arwen, then the information that you've given, which is very helpful, about generators, should feed into that risk assessment. Because one of the mitigations might be, all the stuff that's just been discussed about dual PAT testing, so our resilience could go higher. I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in a specific example. I'm just saying that that's the sort of process that the county council should go through.
Okay. I think it's a good point. It's a good point, Peter. I think it's probably something which is probably happening. I would have thought. I'm presupposing this, but I think your risk process is the standard risk process that the council uses, which you just mesh into. Is that right? When you have a lot of it will be done locally, I would have thought, but
we are doing that within service, and we've reported into overview and scrutiny as well on the kind of lessons learned and next steps from Storm Arwen as well.
Yeah.
Certainly, members of overview and scrutiny were keen to see providers get their own generators as well. It's a contentious issue about what we put in the contract, because if we were to make it a contractual requirement, it has a financial impact on care homes. So we are considering how we deal with that one. And it might be that the council puts some capital in themselves, as I say, to subsidise some of that. So we're looking closely still at our response. But I think the generators in itself, without wanting to get bogged down just into generators, I'd never thought of the PAT test angle, if I'm perfectly honest. So it does open up new questions once you do have generators, because they aren't the sole solution to this. So we have to look in the round at what the response is, and we are doing that at local level.
okay. I think we've had a good discussion around that whole area. Not just, let's forget the generators. That's just one aspect of the entire risk and the approach to risk. So I'll finish off with Councillor Dale. You had one last
Just
question.
very quickly, can we have a conversation? We've got the corporate risk coming up later, but it's on pink paper, so I think maybe that's an opportunity to add a little bit to it.
Exactly. Okay, well, I think that has been really useful. And again, another positive report and a lot of detail in here that's been very good. And I think it's been well appreciated by the committee, and I think we've had a good discussion around the whole general area in the background of the risks that you're facing at the present time, so that's been very helpful. So I can thank you both for coming and presenting that. I think unless anybody has any questions, you can either stay for the rest of the committee or you're free to leave as you choose. I'm sure you've got plenty on your plates if you want to
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay. So, we move on to item 7, which is the report of the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, the Corporate Fraud Interim Report, which I understand is going to be presented by Amy Hodgson. Thank you, Amy.
Yes.
Just press the button and
Is
that's
that
it. You're on.
Am I
You're
on?
on.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Amy Hodgson and I am the manager of the corporate fraud team. So today we have the interim report for the corporate fraud covering from April to September 2022. It's a report that is brought to you every 6 months. So I'm sure you're familiar with it, although I have slightly changed the format just to make it a little bit more user and reader friendly. The information in it is the same as what is always brought to you. There's nothing really that I would need to bring to your attention. The financial results that we've recorded are all clearly shown on page 39. At the bottom, at part 8, we have recorded, you'll notice, some administration penalties for the first time in quite a while. And on page 40, on table 9, it talks about cautions and administration penalties, which are a result of COVID restrictions being lifted a little bit and us able to move to a more criminal and face-to-face investigations, which is what we've always done in the past. There's also a little mention at the very end on page 44 about on page 41 about the single person discount project, which has just started, and there was a test sort of sample area covered within this report, but obviously there'll be a lot more interesting information to bring to you in the next report. But other than that, Chair, I would just invite any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Single person discount project. That's the first one I've got to say. That's a very impressive, the single person discount project. Can you unpack that a little bit? What is it that the project's covering? What are you looking at?
Yes, so there was agreement made that we could run initially on a 2-year basis, a project to review every single household within Northumberland in receipt of single person discount on the council tax. So everyone that gets a 25% discount on the council tax, and we're going to review those that had been in receipt of that discount for in excess of 18 months to ensure they were still entitled to it, because it's a discount that is applied on a council tax account and it just remains on the account unless the liable party tells us of any changes. So that the official launch date of the project was the 1st of October, which obviously falls outside of this reporting period, but there was a sample area ran prior to that, which is all, and I can confirm that the project to date is already bringing in really good results. We're using credit reference data to match against the single person discount, and it then produces a risk score, and all high risk cases are looked at by our 2 single person discount officers, who will then look into various different things to see whether we can see why it's high risk. It may be that the person's moved, or there's a student or what have you in the property, so we can easily discount those. There's a lot of referrals go to DWP if there's benefits in payment. We don't look at them ones. And those that are left that are high risk, all receive a visit from one of our officers to discuss their entitlement to the discount and whether or not they're still entitled.
That's very interesting. It sounds very work intensive to actually get to the point where you get to a visit, I would have thought.
We do have a data matching system that does a lot of the work for us. So basically we'll get a data extract from the council tax system for a particular area, we'll run it through the data matching system, and overnight that generates the risk score.
Right.
And it, like I said, it's only the high risk ones that are then
So then you get somebody to actually physically
further
go out.
looked at. Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my head around what they actually do. They knock on somebody's door and say, "Are you still living on your own?" And they say yes, and then they go back to the office. Is that the way it
No.
works?
So that it would be challenged. So the visit they would have further information from the credit reports to show why it was deemed high risk. So who the other people were that were linked to the property, why they were linked to the property, and how long they had been linked there based on their credit history. So it would, for example, say that they've got communications accounts, they've got bank accounts, they've got loans, they've got credit accounts. So they would go to the visit armed with that.
So they're armed with some evidence before they go in there. So when somebody says, "No, I'm still living on my own," they say, "Well, why is this showing this?" And so, are you getting a good hit rate with
yes,
this?
Yes, we're getting a really good success rate. And I know there was a separate report produced by Gareth Williams, who's project managing, and that was passed to councillors to review a little while ago. And like I said, at the next report, we're sort of end of year report, I'll have a lot more information to bring to that.
Good. Well, that was the only one that jumped out at me personally, I've got to say, because I was fascinated by how you were doing this and how easy it is a job to actually get somebody to fess up, if you like, that they're not. And do you claim the money back again? Have you got the opportunity?
Yeah. So what happens is if one of the officers goes out to somebody with single person discount and they through an interview, it is established that there has been a second adult in the property for 2 years, 3 years, or what have you, statements taken from the liable party, they then come back to the office. That information is then passed to the council tax team, who amend the council tax account and remove that discount from whatever date it is that there's been a second adult in the house, and then rebuild.
Right. Okay, so we actually get the money back. So it's not just an academic exercise. We're claiming the money.
We're claiming the
money. We're getting the money back. That's excellent. Any more questions? Councillor Dale, you've got a question?
Yes. Is that still ongoing? I mean, I've got to the point now, I'm not sure how many houses are there actually under the right to buy still, because I can't remember what all the details of the years of the ownership and everything else, but it's still obviously ongoing.
Yeah.
And is it a problem? Because it obviously, there's quite a lot of generation there, or saving there.
There is, yeah. And that's because the discounts offered are quite significant under the right to buy.
And the value of the house will be like that now.
Yeah, and the percentage discount as well obviously goes up with the value of the house.
Yeah.
So yes, we do still look at all of those. The right to buy discounts, the right to buy scheme still exists, and there doesn't seem to be any whispers about it ever coming to an end or even being reviewed. So until that happens, we will continue to verify 100% of the applications.
You did a very good job.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Dale. Councillor Wallace, you had a question.
Thanks, Chair. I was interested in your preventative measures, and I love to see prevention rather than people knocking on doors trying to get money, asking them if they're single or not. Makes sense. But I was very intrigued with the work you were doing with Section 106 officers in planning.
Yes, so...
Could you just briefly explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So that piece of work came off the back of a number of complaints being received about a particular property that had been purchased using the discounted market value. So they purchased a new build with a massive discount, and there was numerous complaints that the person that had bought the property had never lived in the property and had used it as like a holiday let, which was against it went against what the whole purpose of the scheme is, but it also sort of went against the rules of the scheme as well. So there was an investigation carried out, and that investigation highlighted a number of flaws within our application process. So on the back of that, I worked with the team that deal with the applications as to how we can actually make it a far more robust process, application process, to prevent anything like this happen again, because there was definitely mistakes made and errors, and if things had been picked up at the time, it might not have got to the point of even the sale going through. So worked with the team there. There's a lot of work went in by myself, but also by them, and it's been agreed that rather than us being actively involved, like we are with the right to buy applications, that we will just offer sort of like an advisory and investigation. So they are quite happy to do the verification checks themselves and the application process themselves. Obviously come to us for any advice when needed, and if they feel anything needs a full investigation, then they'll refer it in our team.
Thanks, Chair. That's very interesting. I just hope one day you get involved with viability.
Well, we're always looking at new areas to get into, and we'd definitely take any sort of advice from anybody. If anyone wanted to look at it, an area, then let us know, and we will.
Okay, I think Chief Internal Auditor had just a point on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to add to Amy's answer and picking up the point that Councillor Wallace made about the preventative measures being better than a reactive, and it was just to assure committee, Amy and I have been in some discussions around working through a risk assessment for us as an organisation, looking to target some of our preventative measures where that would be best served. So that work's ongoing at the moment. The Royal We, obviously Amy's undertaking quite a bit of that work at the moment, and then when that's complete and all agreed, we would be bringing that to you as a feature meeting of the committee, just so you see there is a bit of a plan behind some of the preventative work as well.
That would be really useful.
Just to add to that.
That's really useful. Thanks for that, Kevin. But I have two hands. I had Councillor Oliver first, then Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, discounted market value is often a misnomer, depending on where it's located, because it can be discounted from a very high price, and therefore it doesn't really meet any social housing sort of criteria, because it's still unaffordable. So wouldn't one way to solve this problem be to stop doing them, and actually, as a Section 106 planning condition, require the building of houses to rent rather than houses to sell at a discount in often expensive areas? And that would solve both what the problem that Councillor Dale raised around the housing stock diminishing with the right to buy, and it would also help the problem with the potential abuse of the discounted market value system.
I think that's a little bit beyond the remit of this this committee, Councillor, but it's a good suggestion, which I'm sure everybody's pleased to hear. Okay, Councillor Grimshaw.
Well, actually, Chair, it's just an observation that still 55% is council tax to fraud. And, and this is still very, very worrying, because obviously it impacts the way we run. But also, please, and it might not be applicable today, but it would be very worthwhile, I think, if the audit committee could also have perhaps a little bit of training through the fraud officers as well, because I think there's a lot going on that we perhaps could observe from the other side. Not going into specific details, but just give one highlight of ways people get around. I know we did a training session many years ago, and it was invaluable actually, and we've never repeated it. But I think that would be beneficial to this committee.
I can chime on that, because I think one thing I would like to do in the coming year or so is to ratchet up our training as a committee. Because I think we do need to get more under the bonnet of some of these things and have a bit more knowledge ourselves about some of the things we're talking about. We are conscious that the people who talk to us are experts, and we are not experts. We're amateurs trying to pick up what they're saying. So I think a bit of training wouldn't be a bad idea. Kevin, have you got some thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate that, I think it's been mentioned in a number of different forms. So I know we've spoken about training, Chair, as part of the review with members, which we're busy in the process of, which I referred to earlier. I know discussions that Jan and I have had, we've had similar sort of thoughts about that would be really good. But then obviously the preventative plan that I just referred to about the work that we're doing, one of the things Amy and I have actually talked about is training and awareness, both for employees but also elected members and probably audit committee members in a slightly different way as well. So totally agree with everything you said, and it's in hand. We had that discussion last week, so yeah.
Well, in that case, then maybe it's one to capture for the action part, Andrea, is you know, Kevin has committed to actually providing some training in this area for us. And yeah.
No, please don't.
Okay, so we'll make sure we capture that one and we'll make sure it happens. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that suggestion. Good ideas. Any more? Peter Topping, you've got a quick one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I think it makes sense for corporate fraud to sit more closely with the audit team, but are there any downsides from moving away from Revs and Bens? And if so, are you addressing them?
Tricky question.
The answer is
where
no,
I'm sitting,
Amy.
isn't it? It's early days, so not that we've noticed, but I can't foresee it being a problem. I mean, like as you mentioned on page 38, the chart there clearly shows that the majority of the financial results that we record come from council tax and NNDR. And we've no plans to move away from that kind of work, and the single person discount project obviously is rolling out because we see that that's a big area, and there's also other ideas that we'll have to look into other areas of council tax and joint working with benefits and things like that. So the work, we've got a really good working relationship with the staff within Revs and Bens because we're sat within them for a long time, and I can't imagine that that's going to change. So we'll continue to encourage that as best we can, and I think moving to audit, hopefully that'll encourage a better working relationship with a lot more departments across the council, which I think can only be a good thing, really.
Okay, thank you, Amy. It occurs to me that moving to internal audit actually changes your focus slightly to me, not so much outward looking towards the public, if you like, but also a bit more inward looking towards the council staff themselves. Because I was looking at your graph here on 38, and I take that the yellow, the very slim yellow section is internal fraud, 0.4%. I'm just reminded of an organisation I worked at many years ago, which always reported 0% internal fraud, mainly because they never looked for it. So it's one of those sort of things. Are we looking very much for internal staff-related issues and frauds? Kevin, maybe have a better handle on that one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think I would echo everything Amy said. And I think that close working relationship with staff and revenues and benefits is great to see. And I hope it continues. They are located very near us as a team as well to help facilitate that. I think what the move helps demonstrate for me, and I'll probably be biased in sort of the way the question was asked as well, but I think it helps to demonstrate the difference between a potentially a revenues and benefits fraud team and a corporate fraud team. And I hope the first couple of months that we had have been a very good move towards that, and just linking in with some of that corporate approach that obviously the audit and risk team have. And obviously at the moment, you're quite right, Councillor Grimshaw, about the majority of the work in the revenues and benefits side, but there are a whole other sort of potential risks across the wider organisation as well, which kind of again comes back to what Amy and I have been talking around. Right, let's have a corporate look at what may be there and prioritising those on a risk basis, and then focusing our efforts. It may be as part of that work we realise what the priority is still the revenues and benefits side, but at least we've done that work corporately, and we will be reporting that back to a committee in the fullness of time.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I think the key thing is that the radar should be switched on for the internal possibility of fraud as well as the external possibility, because we know that there's a fraud going on out there with Revs and Bens. It's a given, but we don't know yet the extent of potential fraud within the organisation, maybe as much as we do for that. So that's good. So we look forward to seeing some more clarity on that in the future. Any more questions before we Okay, well, in that case, then I'll thank Amy for presenting this. Thank you very much. It's been a really useful report and very interesting, and the sort of stuff that I think the committee is quite interested in, and we'll be seeing more of in the future. So, unless you particularly want to stay for the rest of the meeting, Amy, you're free to actually go if you want, or you can stay if you want to see the rest of the meeting. Okay. I don't think we need to actually propose and second this report, do we? To recommend the Audit Committee notes and considers the update on work. So we're not actually authorising or endorsing this. So don't need an endorsement second. Okay, back to the agenda. Okay, well, number 8, report of the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, Statement of Accounts, Group Boundary Review.
Chair, I'm just step out at this point.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Reid. So who's presenting this? Okay, Jan, thank you very much.
So this is a report that we bring to the committee on an annual basis just to confirm before we start work on the relevant financial statements, the details of the boundary review. So in other words, which organisations should have their financial statements consolidated into the council's statement of accounts. So for the year ended 31st of March 2023, the recommendation is that we continue to consolidate Advanced Northumberland Limited. And in this instance, because Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited was trading during 2023, that is also consolidated. Active Northumberland's financial statements should not be consolidated for all of the reasons set out in the report. And then the final recommendation is to note that with the creation of Energy Central Campus Limited, which is a vehicle for delivering some of the enterprising Blythe programme, in which the council has a shareholding, that we will need to consider whether that needs to be included, but we think it's unlikely for the 22-23 financial year on the basis of materiality. But we're continuing to look at the wider arguments for consolidation or otherwise of those accounts. I don't think it's going to be an issue for 22-23, but may well be going forwards as activity in that company starts to ramp up. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all I was going to say by way of introduction, Chair.
That's it, yeah, that's very clear. Thank you, Jan. I'll open it up for questions. It's a fairly straightforward report, I think. Thank you, Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. I just have some clarification, if you don't mind. The parameters of Energy Central Campus. And the reason I ask is, I believe that's where the current training centre is for the Port of Blythe. But I ask also because I represent the Sleekburn ward, and we have many hectares called Energy Central. So I can see a confusion between the two, of one being in Blythe, and many people are confused because they thought British Vault was in Blythe. So, you know, I make a valid point. It's not in Blythe. Energy Central is where JDR Cables is being constructed. There's no other name, and yet in Blythe, we refer to Energy Central Campus. So I just want that clarification that it's actually going to be that training centre where the current Port of Blythe training services is sited. I don't know, I just want some clear clarification.
Is that one you can clarify, Jan?
I think so, Chair. So Energy Central Campus Limited is the company that's been set up that will be the vehicle for delivering the Energy Central Learning Hub in Blythe as part of the Energising Blythe programme. So,
thank you, sir. Thank you. So can you tell me where that is?
my understanding is it's in Blythe, but I
I don't want to be pedantic, don't misunderstand, Chair. It's a big place, Blythe. It's the largest town in Northumberland.
I
Many people
don't have any
regard
knowledge of this, to
Sleekburn
be
as
quite
being
honest.
part of Blythe.
Councillor Orwell,
I can answer that. The first phase has just started construction next to Port Training Services in Blythe.
It is going on outside.
And I think there are plans for a second phase at a location yet to be determined, which I'm guessing will be Blythe, but it may not be.
So this is the big building project that's going on near Ridley Park. Is that the one just at on the corner of the park of the back of the harbour? No, a different one.
It's down near the caboose and the
one.
Blythe workspace, and it's just along the road from the Blythe workspace.
Right. Okay.
Commissioner's Quay.
Commissioner's Quay. Yeah. So we're all talking about the same place. Yeah.
Yeah,
As you
but
say, Blythe's
Energy
a big
Park
place.
is the other side of the river, Chair, so you can see the confusion.
Absolutely. I think we're clear on that one. That's good.
Right.
Any more questions on this for Jan? When we? No. I think it's a very clear report, Jan. Thank you. But, oh, Peter.
So, well, I give way to Councillor Dale. Yes.
Can I ask you about the capital assets in advance, which we talked about earlier on, but it was just something, the Advanced Northumberland Limited doesn't actually own the all the leisure centres.
Sorry, are you talking about Active Northumberland?
Yes.
No, Active Northumberland does not own any of the leisure centres. They're council assets.
Thank you. I just
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's clarified that. Okay, Peter, do you have a hand up?
Well, it was just on that basis. So the report has quite a lot of detail about why Active Northumberland shouldn't be within the boundaries. And I suppose I was asking, are they required to demonstrate things like value for money in the way that if they were within the boundaries of the group, then they would?
So Active Northumberland is a registered charity. They are subject to various requirements that are laid down by the charity commissioners. The duty of best value rests with the council, not with Active Northumberland. So our responsibility and our duty is to ensure that the arrangements that we have in place with Active Northumberland as the day-to-day operator of our leisure centres in and of itself delivers value for money.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think that is fairly clear, and it's a good report, and it's very clear. Thank you for that, Jan. We've clarified a few points there. We're only being asked to note this report. There isn't anything to vote on. There isn't anything to propose. So it's just been pointed out. Thank you. Over the page, agree that Active Northumberland's financial statement should not be consolidated in the council statement of accounts. So we have to agree. Can I have a proposal for that, please? Councillor Dale proposed, Councillor Jackson seconded. And can we do that? Can we agree that Active Northumberland's financial statement should not be consolidated into the council statement of accounts for the financial year 31st of March? Show of hands. Yes, please. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jan. Okay, so we have Councillor Readers outside, so we just pause for a second when Andrea brings him back in. Okay, thank you, colleagues. After just a short break there, we'll continue on with the business of the day. Just to inform you that Councillor Reid has unfortunately been called off to another meeting, so he's had to leave this meeting. But we're still quorate, so there's not an issue there. So we continue on with the agenda. We got to item 9, which is the report of the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, the Statement of Accounts 2021. But as we said earlier, that has actually been withdrawn from this meeting, and I'm told will be presented to the next committee, which is in May. So we'll have to pass on that one. And we move on to the hard copies, which I hope you've all taken from the front here, which are the reports of the External Auditor, the Audit Completion Report 2021, which we have Cameron Waddell from Mazars to talk us through. Thank you, Cameron.
So in terms of the audit of 2021, receiving the status of the audit that we are broadly finished. We have got bits and pieces still to tie up on the audit, but most of the work is complete. So the key bit of work really is in relation to infrastructure. So you've heard me talk about that before. You'll remember I said that the statutory override was put in place on Christmas Day last year because the civil service has a sense of humour. So for a local authority where the 2021 audit had already been signed off, that goes through 21-22 and there'd be a prior period adjustment into 2021. But because your 2021 audit's open, then what Jan and the team have got to do is adjust the numbers through 2021 and 21-22. And we need to work through that with Jan and her team, which we're doing just now. So that's probably the single biggest issue. We've still got a bit of work to review on the advanced audit file, and that's nothing to do with the advanced audit not being finished for that year. It is. It's just we'd parked this audit at a point in time, so we just need to go back and revisit that. The pensions issue I mentioned in the pre-meet has got nothing to do with 2021, so I'll come back to that when I'm talking about 21-22. And apart from that, there's other bits and pieces we just need to tidy up. One of the things being exit packages, which we touched on before, so I'm not going to go through that again. VFM, we're busy liaising with Jan and others within the council around about the wording. You'll see that we are I know we will be issuing a significant weakness in arrangements in relation to governance, and I know we'll be making recommendations. The key thing for us is bluntly to get the recommendation correct. So we're not actually going over all ground, we're actually trying to make sure that the focus of the council is moving forward and maintaining the oversight and the scrutiny in relation to both the issues that Jan identified last June in the Section 114 notices, but also the Solace report as well, and the other things that the council's been doing subsequent. Because bluntly, that needs to be the focus, I think, of attention. So that will be something. I'm going to issue a separate report on that, so it's just standalone, it's quite clear. It's about that one issue. Audit approach-wise, not much changed. As you'll see from the report, materiality changed a little bit, it always does, because we always change it when we get the final version of the accounts, and either goes up or down based on what the council spends. But then, looking at the key findings, if that's okay, Chair, I'll go through those. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but enough, and if people have got questions, and I'll just stop every so often, because it's quite a long report. So in terms of significant findings, so the key thing we focus our attention on, a lot of the work in the audit is around about the significant risks of misstatement. And the first one on page 12 of our report talks about management override of controls. I think the committee will be familiar with either ourselves or your predecessor auditor explaining that this is an audit risk that exists on all audits. It doesn't matter if you're Northumberland County Council or a much smaller business elsewhere. The auditor must recognise this risk and do work. So fundamentally what we focus our attention on is things like estimates in the accounts, some of the key judgments that Jan makes when she's actually preparing the accounts. And we also look at something called journals. And a journal is basically the way that officers put manual entries into the accounts. And my normal joke about this is one of the factors we sort of put in there is journals prepared and input into the system by the Director of Finance. But I've yet to actually meet a Director of Finance that knows how to do that. Or has forgotten how to do it once they became a Director of Finance. But notwithstanding, so what we do with the journals is we look at characteristics that might suggest manipulation of the accounts. So, for example, we would tend to look at senior officers putting in, because why would a senior officer be putting a journal into the ledger? Yeah, we look at journals that might not have been authorised, so the same person's put them in and authorised them. and we look at journals that might not have any narrative. So what you'd expect in a journal is a debit, a credit, telling you where it was, and then a narrative that said, and this is why I've had to do this, as opposed to just go through system. So we spend quite a lot of time on that. And you'll see, I'm pleased to say, we've not identified any issues. And sometimes we do. So not necessarily here, but we have elsewhere. So that's good. On pensions, I'll come back to the issue on 21-22 later, but on pensions, so the council's got a big pensions liability in relation to local government pension fund, and the accounting for that's quite complex. There's lots of entries in your accounts, so it appears in numerous statements, and there's a big note. We spend quite a lot of effort on that because there's high estimation uncertainty, because it's all based on actuarial models, estimates about mortality, asset values, etc. And you'll see from the report that the different bits of work we actually do in relation to that area. Now, in the old days, before the pandemic, from one year to the next, there wasn't always a huge difference from the start of the year to the end of the year in terms of asset values. That's not been the case for the last 3 years. So generally speaking, when the actuary does their initial assessment of what you've got to put in your accounts, it's normally done around about May time, Jan? May, June time. At that point in time, the pension fund will not have had all of the reports back from fund managers. The reports they'll have had will have been at the end of December.
I understand that's just a test, so
Can find out. So normally at the end of December, and what they do then is they adjust for that final quarter based on cash movements, so purchases and sales of investments, and then they come up with a number. If there's not a lot of movement in the final quarter of a year, that works okay. There's not normally a big problem. But actually, if you look at the last few years, that final quarter, you've had the pandemic, you've had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you've had lots of other things that have happened, and that's had a big impact on markets in that final quarter. That makes those cash movements less reliable as a source of evidence. So effectively what that means is between what the actuary tells you and what actually the pension fund puts as asset values in their accounts can be enormously different. And I think, Jan, for 2021, I think the difference might have been $250 million-ish for the one that covers yourselves. And obviously your share of that's quite high because you're quite a big council. So in practical terms, what that meant was we looked at it, didn't look like it worked from our point of view. We had a discussion with Jan, you sought an updated actuarial report and put that through the accounts, and that's fundamentally the big change in pensions in 2021. So it is quite a big change. You're not alone in that. Most of the local authorities, I would have thought, certainly all of mine that I'm responsible for, had big changes in that disclosure and the numbers in their accounts as a result of that uncertainty for that final quarter. I think we've said before, we've had quite a few issues around about the valuation of your, it's not so much the plant and equipment, it's the property, so what you actually own. Again, this is a key risk because actually valuers are management experts, they apply lots of different techniques to value assets. Some of that is a matter of fact, like floor areas, some of it is a matter of judgment, and we spend quite a lot of time on this, partly because it's a big number. If you look at your balance sheet, that plus pensions tend to be the biggest ones. And secondly, there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny over auditors in terms of the amount of work we do here. Now, the impact that has on your bottom line, Robin's here, isn't he, from Advance? So if you're a company, you would have an asset, you'd charge depreciation, it'd hit your P&L. It doesn't matter. For a local authority, depreciation doesn't hit. It hits your I&E surplus deficit, but it's reversed out through statutory override, so it doesn't hit council taxpayers. And that happens everywhere. There's a local government body, police and fire too. So ignoring that, it's still a big number in your accounts, and there's still quite a lot of scope for it to be wrong. So we spent a lot of time there. We've had some issues, I think, twofold at Northumberland. One has been the quality of the information underpinning the asset valuations around about things like floor areas, etc. And we've had a few issues around the methodology that the valuers actually use to actually undertake the valuations. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we spent quite a lot of time on this in 2021 and again in 21-22 with a new valuer. And there's still some issues, I think, to get resolved in relation to the way that works in practical terms, which has led to amendments to the accounts. Not uncommon. And you'll see there's quite a lot of reporting in there. I wasn't going to go through every single finding in relation to that, but it's quite comprehensive in terms of what we found and what needs to be sorted out. We also, as a sort of tail end of pandemic, I think to some extent, one of the key things that local authorities had on the radar throughout that pandemic period was how much of the debt they were going to be able to collect from people that owed them money. So from our point of view, the way that the council looked at that collectability of debt, it's not like you're not allowed to call it provision anymore. It's an expected credit loss. Looking at that and actually making sure that we're comfortable with the methodology that the Jan and her team had used to underpin that collectability. And that also is linked through to some of the COVID grants that you might have received where they had a clawback potentially. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. We did identify a few issues, but those have been resolved in relation to accounts. And you'll see that the COVID grant recognition is the next one, which is broadly a similar issue in terms of, is it actually the council's grant or is the council acting as an agent of central government? When I say that, what I mean is the central government have given you money, your only responsibility is to give that money to somebody else. Yeah, as opposed to get the money and then spend it by the council. There's a different accounting treatment for both different scenarios. And again, no significant matters at all in relation to that to report. So I think a good result on that one too. You'll see that you've got some unquoted estimate, equity investments, the main one being the airport. This has been an on and off the radar for several years of auditors across sort of Northumberland, Durham, Town and Wear area because it's obviously things with the pandemic, etc. has had quite a big impact on that. You've got loan notes with, for the airport, you've got an investment with the airport, therefore we're looking at sort of the accounting treatment for that and evaluation. And you'll see that there's nothing significant to report on that fact either. So again a good result. So in terms of other findings on page 19 of the report, you'll see there that, generally speaking, the accounting policies are in line with what we'd expect. You do have quite a lot on your accounts that, bluntly, we think you could probably take out. When I say that, your responsibility is to produce a set of accounts that's materially correct. Yeah, materiality is a concept. That means that if you've got a note that isn't material, you do not need to disclose it. There's no requirement to do so. Most local authorities don't follow that rule. Most local authorities just think we're going to put everything in because it's in the code. But I think there is a bit of scope probably for Jan and her team to save themselves a little bit of effort each year in relation to that. I have other clients that literally put every single thing in, even when it says we haven't got any of these, which is just a complete waste of space in terms of paper and disclosure, because you don't need to tell people you don't have any. You need to tell people if you've got some, really. You'll see there's quite a few things we discussed with Jan and the team around about exit packages, which we've touched on. I wasn't planning to go through that again. We touched briefly on senior officer remuneration as well in terms of amended disclosure in relation to that. And there's a few other areas that we spent a bit of time talking to Jan and the team around about, including the valuation of the PFI waste facility. Just because it's a little bit unusual, it's quite a specialised asset, and therefore it's a little trickier to sort of value as well. So we've engaged people just to give us a bit of a support on that to make sure that what the council's got in there looks reasonable. And we've done that elsewhere as well, so not particularly different. There has been some restatement of the accounts because you changed some of your portfolios and you've got to follow the portfolio model when you do your CIS, etc. No issues there, but something that we did actually talk about in a degree of detail. Significant difficulties during the audit. I think there have been a number of difficulties, and there is definitely scope to improve the quality of the accounts and the working papers, and that's something that Jan, Alice Nelson in particular, and the rest of Jan's team, the manager and I have been talking about how we get this improved to work, so it works better and more smoothly, particularly for 22-23 going onwards. And I think there were some improvements in 21-22, but it's still a little bit to learn, notably probably around about the property, plant and equipment side of things again. Which is not uncommon particularly. You're aware, I think, Chair, that we also have a responsibility to consider any questions or objections received during the audit. It's just to inform the committee we didn't receive any, we actually didn't receive any questions or objections at all during the audit process that's required us to actually undertake any work. There's been quite a lot of correspondence between different people with the auditor and between themselves, which we've considered in the context of the audit. But broadly, most of that will be wrapped up through either exit packages, senior officer remuneration notes, or value for money conclusion.
Excellent. Good. Thank you.
Internal control. I was hoping, Chair, you were going to let me get away with not going through this because it's quite a long section of internal control recommendations. You'll see that we have made several recommendations around about particular either items in the accounts or issues such as exit packages, etc., which you probably expect us to make. I wasn't proposing to go through each of those in great detail. We will follow every single issue up as part of the completion of 21-22 and again via 22-23 where we're not satisfied they've been fully addressed. So anything that's there we will follow up. I think with the agreement of the committee, I think we won't put ourselves through going through a page turner on this because there is a lot of stuff in here and there's a lot of detail. And as long as we're happy that this will be actually followed through and there will be full... Well, I'm happy to take questions as well, Chair.
But questions, obviously, because people have had a little bit of time to read this now, so if anybody has any questions on it, is this a good, appropriate point to stop and just take stock and just say any questions on what we've heard so far from Cameron? Councillor Jackson. Councillor, can you put your microphone on?
Yeah, you were going to map out your value for money comments. When can we expect that?
We're busy working through that just now, so I'm hoping that's going to be, we'll hit the next audit committee.
Yeah, fine.
But I'm hoping we're going to have something issued to officers. From a natural justice point of view, from our point of view, we've got a process. Process is the audit manager and I draft it. Generally speaking, I'll share a rough draft with Jan, which we've shared a little bit of a rough draft to date with Jan Suki and the new chief executive. That then goes through a national consistency process to make sure that the judgments I'm reaching as your auditor are appropriate and consistent with elsewhere, though it's difficult to work out where you might be consistent with at this stage. And then there's an engagement quality control reviewer appointed, another partner who's our national challenge lead, who Jan's met when we've been discussing things like exit packages. To make sure that we are following the requirements of the Code of Audit Practice appropriately. And we're also not being unfair. Yeah.
That's fine.
Now, what we won't be doing, I'll tell you this now, I'm not going to be going back and unpicking absolutely everything. One of the key sources of evidence for us, two of them are the Section 114 notices and the Solace report. Because if you remember the email I sent last January, that was to encourage the council to do what the council was considering already doing around about the governance review. That is a key source of evidence because that looks backwards over a period of years, doesn't it? At a point in time and says actually there are certain things that haven't been done properly, are out of date or need to be revisited. Yep. Now when you unpick those, I think it's a reasonable assumption on our part to say that if it wasn't right in June 22, it wasn't right in June 21, it wasn't right in June 20. Before that, the audits are certified complete by the predecessor auditor. That's nothing to do with us in terms of moving forward. If that makes sense. I hope it does. Yeah. The tricky bit for us is just trying to make sure that we've got the reporting sort of works. We think that we should be able to issue a weakness and a recommendation, one weakness and one recommendation that covers both 2021 and 21-22. And then 22-23, what we'll do is we'll follow up progress, which we've been doing by monitoring the things you were discussing earlier around about the challenge board, etc. 1920 is slightly tricky because we need to follow up the issues that the EY raised in the report that went to this committee in November. So some of which we think aren't issues anymore. There's at least one issue they raised, which are around about the council's governance arrangements in relation to advance. So to be clear, not advances arrangements, the council's arrangements in relation to advance that clearly hadn't been fully addressed. So that one will definitely be an outstanding one. For 1920, my gut feeling is it will be an adverse VFM conclusion. But if you remember, the arrangements then changed with the new Code of Practice in 2021. So we moved from like qualified, unqualified to recommendation or no recommendation, simplistically.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jackson. Okay, do we have any more? Peter Topping.
Thank you. Just, I don't want to go back to the issue we talked about in open session, but the response, the management response, which is entirely sensible about making exit package payments, it's entirely sensible, and I don't understand why, when we were talking earlier about can we get a level of assurance from internal audit that that changes have been put in place to ensure that something inappropriate doesn't happen in future. Well, I mean that it's almost in all there. So I suppose my question to the officers, and perhaps forgive me, Cameron, is is, well, if you've set out a management response to Cameron here, then why can't this committee get a response?
I'm not sure where...
I think it's a slightly different angle, I think, to some extent. So I think
it's about...
What we're saying is that the evidence that's been made available to us that we've gathered during the audit shows that in relation to this year, so for the year ended 31st March 21, that there are exit packages in the accounts that have not gone through proper process. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
And I don't think Jan's disagreeing with that. And the answer to that is clearly going to be, going forward, we're going to put in place arrangements to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
I think that's a slightly different issue to actually looking at why things have happened.
And the value.
Our focus here has really been what's happened, what's going to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again, which is a slightly different angle, I think, but I'm sure Jan's got more to add than that.
I think that makes sense. I'm not sure if Jan wants to come in on that, but it sounds like it's the difference between what went wrong and accept something did go wrong. So there's that little bit of a jump of, so okay, we know it went wrong, but why did it go wrong? So I think that's the subtle nuance between that. Is that your understanding, Jan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Is that okay, Peter, as an answer to that one?
Yeah, but I mean, forgive me, but I mean, the work that you were doing was you were going to be doing was the bit that says, and this is what we've put in place to going forward. And my assertion is that you know, from that management response, you as a council are clear what things need to be put in place.
Yeah, Kevin?
Chair, I wouldn't disagree, and I guess what I hope the work we do then gives the committee and the organisation assurance that that management response has actually then happened. So I think it's drawn the distinction, not that I don't mean anything when I say it like this, but there's a difference between saying we're going to do something and then audit being able to evidence that, yes, we have actually done that. So hopefully it then provides that assurance to everybody that we've done what we said we were going to do.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think my take on this, if I can put mine in, is I think it's the difference between the word reassurance, which is what management give you, reassurance that we're doing it right, and assurance, which is what Kevin's team are going to give us, which is actually we've checked it, we've looked at the evidence, and it is right. And I think that's the gap between reassurance and assurance. And that's in my simple-minded way of seeing things. I think that's how it sort of pans out. But okay, can we move on for that? Councillor Dale, you had a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to just go back to the significant finding is in this property, plant and equipment, the infrastructure. It seems to be ongoing. Year after year it always comes up, I'm afraid. But also we're going to add on all the infrastructure, highways infrastructure and everything else. Was that going to be added into this part of the audit, or is it going to stand separately? Because it'll be a real problem.
Yeah, so we will be producing a letter to follow this report up for this year, once we finish the work on infrastructure. And that will cover both 21-22 and 2021. So, if you remember, Councillor Dale, councils had essentially two choices. Apply the statutory override that was put in place on Christmas Day last year, or persuade yourself and the auditor that actually you had like really, really good comprehensive asset registers for every tunnel, roads, bridge, culverts, whatever, in Northumberland. Now, I have got one client that's still trying to persuade me they've got really accurate asset records for every single one of those assets they've got. And to be fair, they've done a lot of work in it. And if you contrast one asset register I've seen that's got 47 lines in it, they've got 2,000 lines in it. Oh. So 2,000 is probably more likely to be right. I'm still not convinced, and they're still going to have to do a bit. But essentially what Jan's team are doing is they've applied statutory override. That is, I can't remember how long that lasts, Jan. Is it 2025, or is it 2, 3? So basically government have put this in place, Secretary of State's put this in place for a number of years until there's a permanent solution on this. There's a lot of discussion going on just now amongst accountants and estate people and highways engineers and SIPFA and NEO and others around about the solution. At the moment, it sounds, Jan, like the solution might be moving all highways assets to depreciated replacement cost, which I've got to be honest, when that was said to me, I thought I'm just going to go and jump off a building or a bridge somewhere. But actually, in practical terms, that might help resolve the issue. But you're going to have a number of years when you can continue to apply that override. And that's perfectly okay to do. And most of the councils in the country are doing that. So we will report that. My gut feeling is at the moment that we will have several reporting points which are broadly exactly the same as everybody else. Those will be to do with the useful asset life that you've applied across the board for a lot of your highways assets, because there's more up-to-date guidance around about the different lives you should apply. That's not uncommon. I think I've reported at every other council where we've finished the work. Most of my colleagues within Mazar have done exactly the same thing. But generally speaking, the error linked to that tends to be not material. It tends to normally be a few £1 million. Because SITFA published sort of a minimum asset life for a type of asset, an average and a sort of maximum.
Yeah, I believe that's a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, it's
thank you very much.
We're all sick of infrastructure assets, it'd be fair to say.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. That's useful. Councillor Jackson, you had a question.
Have you finished your report into the 21 year end?
There'll be bits and pieces, including infrastructure. We'll need to issue in a letter.
Just for today, because I've got a question just to ask at the end. But are we at the end of it now?
You'll see from the summary of my statements that. So what we've tried to do is put one table and page. My site's terrible. It's not got a page number on it. The summary of statements, section 6. There's an overall summary of all the amendments that have either been made or there, as we had identified, that haven't been. So we've tried to total them up there. You can see the detail that underpins that. A key point, though, to bear in mind is the reserves figure looks like a big change, doesn't it? But you need to remember that you've got usable reserves, those that are available to actually essentially spend, and unusable reserves. Most of the adjustments here are either linked back to pensions or PPE. Both of those don't hit your usable reserves figures. So that they hit things like capital adjustment accounts, revaluation reserves, the pensions reserve, etc. So no impact on council tax. Just an important point, I think, to raise there. I wasn't going to say any more than that, Chair.
Okay.
If there's any other questions.
Okay, so that's it.
Yeah,
so, Councillor Jackson, bearing that in mind, you've got a question.
Really. Yeah. And it's kind of about post-balance sheet events. So that I'm kind of aware that there was a big issue probably during that financial year with Advance and that Farron's claim, where Farron's were trying to claim £14 million for a project in Blythe. And actually, apparently that's been now settled, and actually the balance has gone that they've had to pay the Advance back £150,000.
Councillor Jackson, I think that's probably still ongoing as an issue. So I think I've been informed
my understanding,
that it's probably not something we can actually discuss.
Yeah, but if you get the situation where that had been settled legally, would that be a post-balance sheet event, and would it affect the accounts that we're talking about now?
Right. Yes. No. So. A provision is an estimate in a set of accounts. A provision should be scrutinised by officers up to the point the audit report signed, based on up-to-date information. But I'm going to come back to some pensions, so remember this. I don't want to say it again. And if something changes material that says actually the number we've got wrong, then you need to consider amending, subject to materiality, both sides. So we had. At the 31st March 21, we had, the other thing to just bear in mind is this sits in the group, not the council. Yeah, so we obviously audit the group as well. So we'd done the work we needed to do. Our audit partner for Advance had signed off the 2021 some time ago. Robin might be able to tell me exactly the date, I can't remember. That audit report signed. From our point of view, we probably wouldn't be doing much. I can tell you now, for £150,000, that would be trivial for us. So that wouldn't even be a reporting point from our point of view.
Okay, I think we've exhausted that one, and I think we've got to be very careful. We've got to not talk about things which are ongoing as issues which are still having legal eyes on them at the present time. So I think we've covered that as well as we can. I think
the audit partner for Advance and I have had long discussions around about the concept of IS 37. I'm sure Craig has had long discussions with Robin about the concept of IS 37. IS 37 is the standard that covers provisions, contingent liabilities, contingent assets, etc. And when you should recognise a liability or not, for example. or whether you should just disclose the fact there's an ongoing case. You only have a liability, as in something in the accounts, not a disclosure, where it's probable. Yeah. So you have to assess the probability. And you also need to be able to assess the likelihood, the amount that may have to be paid out. Yeah. So it's not as simple as saying, well, we might have to pay something out and then put a number in. Where that happens, we'll say, that's not a provision. It's not a matter of sort of saying, we think it's going to be about 4 million, but actually we're going to stick another 6 just in case. That extra 6, we would say, that's not a provision. The number of clients I've got that put provisions in, and they might as well put provision for a rainy day in their accounts. That is not a provision. There is no constructive obligation, there is no event, and there's no probable outcome. It's just a rainy day that might happen or might not. So that's a lot of the debate around about Farns has been around about that concept. How much is it likely to be? How probable is it?
Okay.
Etc.
Thank you. I think that closes that one off for now. I think, Cameron, you presented a very good detailed report here. I'm not going to ask you to go in any more depth into this because we've all had a chance to look at this now, and obviously it's Councillor Dale.
Sorry, it's just page 52. That's what I was talking about later because I hadn't read it. But it was just a summary of misstatements, and it said adjusted disclosure amendments annual government statement. Given the elapsed time since it was produced, expected the AGS will be amended.
And we've been discussing.
Oh, so that's the one.
A lot of the AGS has already been. But it's
that's
back
what
to the
I was
point
just trying to clarify the two bits. That's what I was referring to.
I think you asked a little while ago, and I'm not sure when it was. It might have been the pre-meet. So in terms of the AGS, at the point we are ready to sign the audit report, we will be asking Jan whether or not anything else has come to light that should be reflected in there. So it's just that last check we have to do before we sign off.
So it was just in here.
Yeah.
I was up to date.
Okay, thank you. That was useful, very useful discussion on that, and a very good report. Thank you, Cameron. Now, is that you? Because we have a second one on the table here from Azores.
We really would have liked to get to go to 21-22 ECR committee, and it's not a million miles away. I think we'll probably get it out to you way before the May meeting. But a lot of the work is done. A lot of the amendments have been made to the accounts. Most of the work on my audit file has been reviewed. So we're not in a bad place, but we have still a few outstanding queries around about the valuation of property, plant and equipment again, which we're working through. I think the council that's left the building told me that the advance audit was signed off last night, which is good. So that means we can actually finish the review of the advance file and look at the final consolidation going forward. Infrastructure, I've already mentioned, that's a multi-year issue, just needs to get bottom once and for all. And there's other bits and pieces, Chair, but a lot of the work is done and reviewed in the file. A lot of it is actually complete.
Okay.
I'm not going to go through VFM again, we've touched on that.
That's fine.
Pensions, though.
Right.
So I mentioned this in the pre-meeting, Chair. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but there is a national discussion ongoing just now in relation to the local government pension fund. Because, so I mentioned before, if you've got a provision in your accounts up to the point the audit report's signed, you've got to maintain scrutiny over any more up-to-date information that might cast doubt on the number in the accounts. So if you settled a claim, for example. Yeah. Pensions is similar. So the pensions numbers are all estimates. Actuary makes those estimates, provides a letter to Jan shoves it in the accounts. For 2022, there's triennial evaluation done, and that informs how much the council will have to pay into the pension fund for the next 3 years. So I think, Jan, you'll have the draft letter and you'll get the rates and adjustment certificate on Friday. I think you should do, which sets out what has to happen. The information the actuary uses to prepare that, which applies from 22-23, is based on 31st March 22. So that means there's more up-to-date information at last year's balance sheet date now available that might cast doubt on the number that's in the accounts. Yep. And this is solely down to timing. So if infrastructure hadn't been an issue, everything might have been done before Christmas. The audit report would have been issued. Jan wouldn't have had more up-to-date information. So, job a good one. I don't know the answer at the moment to this. There are ongoing discussions between all of the suppliers to local government, which you'll be aware of. You had, obviously, EY before, and there's, I think, another 4 firms engaged in a discussion just now to work out a way forward that everybody can live with, including the sector, not just auditors. And that discussion is ongoing with, I think, other parties, including NEO, etc., just to see whether or not anything actually needs to be done on our side or on the council side. Like I say, I don't know the answer. I think the worst case scenario would be Janice to get a revised report from the actuary, which would probably take a couple of weeks and it costs a bit of money to get. And somebody would have to do some testing on the data that's supplied to the actuary to allow them to come up with a report, if that makes sense. But I think that's worst case, and I think we're all got our fingers crossed. I've just reading my email during some of the other meetings where people were sort of still discussing it, and it looks like we're reaching a point where somebody somewhere will make a decision one way or another, whether something has to be done or not. I don't know just now. As soon as I do know, I'll be straight on the phone to Jan to say this is, in our view, this is what needs to happen to take this forward, which might be nothing. Or it might be a disclosure in the account saying something. Don't know yet. My gut feeling is I tend to be a pessimist when things like this happen because I'm nearly always right. My gut feeling is there's a chance that you'll need an updated report and some work will have to be done in the source data. But there are much brighter people, technically, accounting-wise, looking at this just now than I am, within not just the firm, but then NEO and the other audit suppliers as well. So I'm confident, hopefully this week, next week, we'll actually have a resolution to the issue, and then we'll be able to take that forward.
Okay.
But that's something we're just parking just now until that happens.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Cameron. It's a complex issue, but that's quite straightforward. I mean, my take on this is it's largely about timing.
It's completely down to timing.
Rather than any kind of serious material issue, if we use that phrase for the council.
If I'm saying if the council needs to get a revised report, I would be prepared to bet that the numbers are materially different to ones in the draft accounts just now. But the point I made in the pre-meeting is, just to be absolutely clear about this, regardless of the outcome of this, there will be it will have no impact whatsoever on the council's usable reserves. None at all. Because the whole impact of everything just gets washed through the accounts and back out through the statutory override into the pensions reserve. So it has no impact on the money that the council has got set aside to spend on things.
Okay. So if we're looking at this,
an important point.
Yeah, sure. So
it's a technical accounting issue.
From a risk point of view, the risk is in just the timing and not in the actual, not in the money. So that was a nice, simple way of looking at it. We're not going to be facing a huge bill that we didn't expect. We're actually just looking at a spanner in the works in terms of timing.
I've no idea. Jan will have a better idea than I have how much an actuary charges for a revised IAS 19 report. But I can't imagine it's a huge amount.
Good. Thanks for that. That's useful. Any more questions on that then? Right. Okay. Well, I think that's your two reports finished then, Cameron, and very clear and very useful. They are too. Thank you very much for that. I think that we are only asked to receive the external auditor's report, so there's nothing to vote on this. So thank you for bringing them forward. We'll move on the agenda now. Item 11, urgent business. Well, we haven't been informed of any items of urgent business, so there's nothing there. The date of the next meeting is the 31st of May at 10:15 as usual, with 9:30 as the pre-meeting start as always. And at that point I'll say we have to vote on whether we exclude the press and public for the next part, which is part 2, which is our in-camera part of the meeting. The committee is invited to consider passing the following resolution that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 72, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following agenda items. Can we have a proposer for that? Councillor Oliver, Councillor Jackson seconded. So, okay, so we'll now close the recording and ask for non-voting members to leave, and we'll continue on with the pink paper.